this commodity that South Carolina became the jewel in the crown of the British Empire.
Usually when we think of South Carolina history in relationship to slavery, we think of cotton, but that's antebellum.
Thomas Jefferson himself said this was the best rice ever produced.
There's not near as much been written on rice culture in South Carolina as there has been on King Cotton in the Confederate South.
Rice and slavery, these are the two things that changed the Low Country.
But rice was, next to sugar, the greatest wealth-producing commodity in the British colonies.
Now, when these early planters are coming to South Carolina, 1670, they are looking for a cash crop. They are looking for ways to make money out here. Okay? As a matter of fact, the Lord proprietors provide them with this long list of things to do. Okay? Some of the first things they do is they raise a lot of cattle here. Matter of fact, some people argue that the first enslaved Africans that are here keeping these cattle, these are actually the first cowboys in the United States. Next, they turn to lumber, timber, right? And also what we call naval stores, pitch, tar, turpentine. And then next, they do hide tanning. All right, they will exchange hides with Native Americans. They will tan them out here, and then they'll ship them back to England. And then they turn to indigo.
Originally, the first settlers that came here in the 1670s thought that they could grow sugarcane and reproduce what they were doing in the islands. That didn't turn out to be that way.
The land would not support the growth of sugarcane.
Most of these plantations here in South Carolina, well, we were along all these coastal waterways, all these little tributaries. And guess what's beside all these little tributaries? Marshland. Marsh and inland swamps. Can't raise cattle in it. You can't harvest the lumber out of it. You can't get to it. You can't grow anything in it. Basically, it is useless land.
They had these enslaved Africans who had a knowledge of rice. And they brought the agriculture, the architecture, and the tools necessary to develop a system for rice fermentation and exportation.
But they eventually discovered through some of the slaves that were there with them that they could grow rice because of the tides that could come up the rivers, and they could flood the fields. And of course you need a lot of water to germinate and grow the rice.
But then these planters, they recognized something. Okay? All these crash crops we talked about were using enslaved labor, African labor, to make all these crops, to process them all. The slaves, when they're doing this, well, they're given time, generally on these plantations, to grow some of their own food, grow some of their crops. It offsets what the owner has to provide for. Plus, it's a way of keeping them busy in their off time. Okay? And here's what they notice. Guess what these enslaved Africans start growing in this marshland? They start growing this.
So much lowland, swampy land down in the low country, South Carolina, it was ideal for growing rice.
So enslaved Africans here in the Carolinas are the first one to grow this crop. And when they grow it, they're not growing it for a cash crop. This is food, right? This is my food. But then these planters take this and they turn this into a cash crop.
The slaves are the ones that taught the planters how to do rice. A lot of these slaves, they started, South Carolina specifically started trying to get slaves from the Gambian region of Africa because this was a rice growing area in Africa. And so they were experts in growing rice. And so the whole Gullah culture and rice culture, you can read about this in Dan Littlefield's book on rice culture in South Carolina. And it brought a lot of the African culture into Carolina.
By 1699, the first cash crop exported out of South Carolina, they're going to export about 12,000 pounds. The vast majority of it is going to Europe.
And they had a huge market for rice in Europe. Europeans loved rice, loved eating rice, and so the more they could produce, the better.
By 1770, they're exporting almost 83 million pounds of rice. By the dawn of the Civil War, they're exporting almost 140 million pounds of rice But none of this would have been possible without this enslaved African labor. They had the skill, they had the technology to be able to do this. And they bring this here to the New World with them. So they're not just here for their labor, they're also here for their knowledge and their skill.
It was a very labor-intensive system, and it required many people.
We normally plant between sometime about the 1st of April up until about the 1st of June. We'll harvest the plant usually about the 1st of September up until about maybe the 1st of November. So you're looking at about a 5-month growing. So when the rice is ready to harvest, number one, this crop is going to hit about my shoulder. It's pretty tall. We've got to harvest out. So we're going to drain that field, we're going to get it dry, and then they would walk in with these. It's what's called a rice hook, or you may refer to it as a sickle. We'll go in, what they would do is we'd grab the rice about, maybe about halfway up, and you would cut it. And when you cut it, we're going to leave about a foot of rice, of that stubble left. And then I take that rice that I just cut, and I lay it on top of that stubble. So by laying it on that stubble, I get air on the top, I get air underneath. Right? So this will cure and it'll dry it out. And this is basically what it'll look like. We're going to lay the rice in rows. Between those rows, I'm going to walk with this. This is called a flail. All right? This is the staff, this is the bobbin here. And as I walk between those flails, and I'm not going to do this real big so I don't hit myself in the head, we're going to beat the rice. All right? We're going to thresh it. All right? Not only is this tool an African tool, this is also something very similar to Europeans. Flails are like a universal object. You'll find them everywhere. So we would beat the rice, and when they beat it, they would knock the panicles off. But not only do we knock the panicles off, we crack that panicle. So it's going to be easier for me to get the rice out. We take a handful of this rice, we're going to take a little bit, and we're going to put it into the mortar here. Now, once we take the mortar, we're going to take the pestle, we're going to take the pointed end, and we're going to do what is called pounding the rice. Now, I'm not really pounding this. That's kind of a misnomer. What I'm trying to do is get the rice to push against one another so that friction from the hull will cause that panicle or that hull to come off. Right? Now, generally speaking, how work is done on a rice plantation is we use what is called the task system. Everybody familiar with that?
That rice culture, because of the task system, was not as harsh on the slaves.
And so once a family unit completed their tasks, they were free to go and take care of the family. So they could hunt, they could fish, and they could provide for themselves.
The task system is basically, in a nutshell, is a quota each day. A slave is given a certain quota or a certain job to do. On a rice plantation, the task would be a 1/4 acre a day. That's what one person would have to do. All right, let's say hoeing out that 1/4 acre. Now, for the owner, this is an excellent way to work the plantation. Because number one, since I'm assigning amounts to them, I know exactly how much work is being done every day.
With the development of the cotton industry in North Carolina, by example, it was the gang system. And you just had to work and work and work prior to the development of the cotton gin. And so there was no end to the time it took or the necessity of poundage that had to be picked in order to take to the mill to be processed.
Because the slaves know exactly what they're supposed to do, I don't have to supervise them. They don't have to be watched over. We don't have to watch them. Matter of fact, not only do we have to watch them, we can let them work independently. Not gang labor like in Virginia they use for tobacco. We can do individual here.
And so the average age of an able-bodied person was somewhere in their teens to 20s. So most of the labor was done by young girls, 14 years of age. They were the most able-bodied, the most craft able, and as a result, much of the skills that were essential for most of the work that was done by women.
Speaking, a task was designed to take that slave roughly 8 to 9 hours to complete. Right? But some more industrious slaves, sometimes depending upon their health, their skill, they could do this maybe in 4 or 5 hours.
The task system itself was oriented toward rice culture, where you were given an acre or 2 or ever how much to finish for the day. And if you could finish it in 7 hours, you had the rest of the day to yourself.
The men prepared the land. They did the digging in the soil, and after that the women took care of the rest of it. They do the picking, making certain that the plants weren't choked by weeds, and then there was the actual preparing of the rice, not only harvesting, but cleaning it and polishing it and preparing it for export.
We can tailor that task to fit the slave's need. Remember I said that full task, quarter of an acre? What about the slave's older? Can't do a quarter of an acre. It's just physically impossible for him. Let's have him do a half task. Let's have him do an eighth of an acre. All right, if we can't do that, we'll do a quarter of an acre. We'll do a quarter of a task, excuse me, a 16th of an acre. This way, we're getting the full maximum effort or job out of every slave on the plantation. Plus, we're tailoring it to fit the slave. So as he gets older, I can just change that task. So he could always be working for us. So for the plantation, for the owner, this is an excellent system. What about the slave? Benefits him as well in a certain degree. Once the slave finishes this task, he's on free time. He can take care of his personal matters. He can work in his own garden. He can take care of the roof on his house. He can do all kinds of different things. So you see there's a built-in incentive. The quicker they get the task done, the more time they have for themselves.
Whereas gang labor that tobacco operated best under was just basically from sun up to sundown, you worked in a gang until the driver told you you were done.
So that's two very different styles, the gang system of labor and the task system of labor.
For the slaves who work in the rice field, that is the most unhealthful thing that a man can do.
Well, there was high turnover because of the morbidity rates of people at that time in history as a result of smallpox, dysentery, dengue, resulted in very short lifespan.
That there's something in rice cultivation that's not in tobacco cultivation, and that's a stronger association with disease.
They're always standing in a complete state of moisture. They're either standing in water or they're standing in mud. And over time, they develop such thing as ringworm, trench foot. Basically, their feet rot off after a while.
Because of the swampy land, because of the problems that can happen to your feet from standing in the mud and the water all day long, every day. The health problems that came as a result of working in the rice fields were phenomenal. It's not something I had really ever thought that much about.
They turned it into cultural power. When you were in the house, did you see this anywhere? It's all over the house. It's in the furniture. It's in the silverware they use. It's actually, if you saw it, it's on the clothing or the buttons of the livery of the clothing that the slaves wore. So this becomes an important staple down here in West.
These rice planters were some of the wealthiest men in America. And it was that wealth that gave them the opportunity to be influential in American history. The Middletons were very influential in the early republic. Henry Laurens was one of the presidents of the Continental Congress. He was also an ambassador to the Netherlands during the American Revolution for part of the time, was captured. So some of these rice planters, because of their wealth, no doubt, because of their status, they're able to, in some ways, exert more influence than normal.
They take that economic power and they turn it into political power. All our early delegates to the First Continental Congress, Second Continental Congress, the rest, senators and congressmen here from the Low Country, the vast majority of them, they are rice planters.
Today on Barefoot in the Colonial Kitchen, we're going to be demonstrating the enduring legacy and importance of Carolina gold rice. Not only was this ingredient vital during the colonial period, but it still is important today because of the chicken casserole I'm going to show you today that calls specifically for Carolina gold rice. We're going to start out with 1 can of cream of mushroom soup and 1 can of cream of celery soup. And then to both of these, we're going to add 1 can of chicken stock. And make sure that when you purchase your chicken stock, you look for the low sodium variety because you want to go ahead and salt and pepper your chicken and you don't want to add too much salt to your recipe. So we're going to add that entire can. And you can just go ahead and add all of your ingredients into the casserole dish so that you only have one dish to clean up afterwards. And then I'm just going to slowly whisk together this mixture. And as this starts to incorporate, you're going to want to add 1 teaspoon of onion powder, and then just a dash of garlic powder. And if you didn't have one of these ingredients, you could substitute garlic salt or dried onion flakes. All right, so that mixture is coming together. And we're going to add 1 small can of mushrooms. And we're also going to add to this 1 cup of our most important ingredient, the Carolina Gold Rice. And then just make sure all of this is thoroughly combined. And then once you have all of this just mixed together well, you're going to take, you can either use boneless chicken breasts, boneless chicken tenderloins, or even boneless thighs if you prefer dark meat. And what I did beforehand was I salt and peppered the chicken tenderloins that we're using today. And then just go ahead and place those right on top. And then once you have that chicken evenly distributed over the top, just go ahead and cover the whole thing with a slight sprinkle of paprika. In this recipe, it's going to serve about 4 people. Alright, and once you have that done, you're just going to put this in the oven at 350 degrees for 45 minutes to an hour. And as long as you don't see any bubbles on the bottom of the casserole dish, you'll know that your casserole is ready. Also, for some added flair halfway through the cooking process, I'm going to add some sharp cheddar cheese and some crispy onions just to add a little something extra on the top. And here's our finished product. You can see that the addition of the cheese and the crispy onions on top create a nice crunchy topping that's also going to add a nice salty bite for your casserole. And I hope you enjoyed learning about the continued relevancy and importance of Carolina Gold Rice today on Barefoot in the Colonial Kitchen.
Carolina.